Well, I'm so glad to be talking to you.
It's great to see you, David. What's
Good
going
to see
on?
you. It's I was thinking recently. I was thinking like, wow, it's been a while since we had a little chat,
I know.
and you have to let me know next time when you're in New York.
Of course,
Um,
yeah.
because
I'll be
we'll.
there a bunch April, May, like late April and then May again.
Oh,
Uh,
good. Okay, well, let's plan on
of
trying
course,
to get
that'd be great.
together
Yeah, of course.
and plot and scheme, as they say.
I know it's fun. So we had a great time last time. So,
So, first of all, congratulations on the appointment as artistic advisor, and
thanks.
we're really thrilled to have you on the artistic team. Um,
Super excited to to kind of collaborate as deeply kind of deeper with an organization that's been such a pleasure to work with and such a ridiculously talented group of musicians. So
yeah,
yeah,
they're
we've had a
great.
great time so far, and I can't wait for what's coming. So.
Good, good. Me either. It's funny because I think one of the things that is is great about having a really good collaborative artistic advisor, from a music director perspective, is that like some of the conversations we've started having about concert experience and the kinds of things from an audience perspective, like what makes a concert enticing, what are the things that make concert going really, why get off your couch and come to a
Uh-huh.
concert,
Yep, that's
those
right.
kinds of things. And I really love the idea of having that kind of back and forth sounding board about sharing ideas, because I know you've done a lot of that with other groups that you've worked with in terms of like curating special concert
Oh,
experiences. I mean, for instance, there was the one, and I love this, and thank you for sending me all the
oh
information.
yeah, of course.
But uh, the one where you were, and of course I'm blanking on it, but we were talking
In San
about this,
Antonio, yeah, the one that we talked about. Yeah, so
right? Yeah,
that's
in
what
San
I'm in the
Antonio,
middle
right? Could you
talking
talk
about
a little bit
curating
about that, because
experiences.
I love that idea.
Yeah, so basically, our CEO and kind of executive director. I'm just becoming artistic director of the whole festival, the 210 June Festival in San Antonio, and that's under the umbrella organization of the Orchestra of San Antonio, and which is the resident orchestra at the Tobin, and CMI, which is Classical Music Institute, which is kind of their educational wing,
Hmm.
and so we started talking, and kind of he just kind of gave me this abstract idea about like, hey, I want to make the whole season like the orchestra, kind of the chamber orchestra concerts, there's a chamber music series as well during the winter and the summer festival about beauty and what that means to you, and things like that. Like, see what you can do with it, which is it's a very obviously very open, let's say open question. So I started thinking about it and researching, and I love trying to find ways to connect with other art forms, and then I feel like it's a huge source of inspiration, and kind of to always try to research about museums and how they curate. They're so good at. I feel like they're
Yeah,
so much better in a way than
in terms of
musicians are
curating the
at
experience, exactly.
right curating the
Yeah.
experience, and they're just so used to that. That's like such a huge part of their of what makes a great museum great. And I came across this catalog and this New York Times article. That's where I started, of the Museum of Art and Design from New York, and how they had done this big um, you know exhibition on beauty, and kind of had done basically this big research of like what is beauty and like how is it manifested in art, and of course in their case design.
Right.
And they had kind of distilled it down to these seven essential kinds of beauty. So I was fascinated by this. I got the catalog. I kind of, went deep into it, and then I was like, wow, this is a great way for, in this case, a chamber music festival to have this arc, which is each concert we kind of encounter two kinds of beauty, except
Mhm.
for one, which we did the ethereals. I really wanted to do. Uh, there was a special program I wanted to do for that, but the other three shows are gonna have two of them and pieces, kind of almost like facing each other in a way, of each kind, and again, it's open enough where I have. I don't know, I feel like you can have a lot of choices, and you can go a
Yeah.
lot of ways about it in a
Yeah.
musical sense. It gives you that flexibility. but also I think it helps as a starting point for also the audience experience. So we're doing like a pre-concert kind of we're kind of internally calling it happy hour concert, which we'll see how it evolves. But with a mix of faculty and fellows, because we have a bunch of grad students from great conservatories coming, and so we want them to again have the experience of playing with great musicians that are more experienced. And so we're going to have that as part of the pre-concert. Again, really standard pieces that are educational valuable to them, but they also relate to the program and to the
Yeah.
theme of the kinds of beauty in this case
Right.
of the main stage program. And yeah, so and then we'll even probably curate some lights and some other little elements that all point towards that direction. So
Yeah, no, I mean it's fascinating to me because as we were talking the last time we were having coffee, the I mean this whole idea of the audience experience and curating programs in a way that whether or not an audience un, whether they get a sense obviously of a through line through the program or whether it's something that is just kind of perceived
hmm
without the obvious through line, but that
okay.
there is always a kind of a through line for a concert, that the programming has a real clear rationale and an arc, like you said, and an arc.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
And we're starting to, in the coming season,
Hmm.
we're going to begin experimenting a
I
little
love
bit
that.
with these kinds of things and moving further and further
I
down the
love this.
road. So it's really exciting to kind of have you on board with this
Well,
because
thank you.
it's it's a holistic, everyone's on the same page kind of idea about
It's
how we.
amazing, and I think the great thing about having a chamber orchestra, you have this flexibility, you have this nimbleness, you have also really interesting repertoire, you
Mhm.
have that beautiful hall that the chamber orchestra plays in, and it's just I think it all kind of has the synergy together that it
Yeah.
have all the elements to be able to really pull it off and really get people excited about it. So
Yeah, no, I mean it's a lot of good things
I
percolating, which is
know,
really,
yeah.
really great.
So
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about speaking of curation. So can you tell me a little bit about your idea behind this program of seasons? I don't want to say four seasons because that's
as many in
a
a way, right?
title of a work, but it's kind of four seasons.
Yeah.
And maybe talk just a little bit about the curation of this program.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so as you and Anne, I think everybody at this point, I feel like in the in the chamber orchestra side knows, I am pretty obsessed with the four seasons of the manifestations, and I grew up, really. It was if you ask me what's like your piece of your childhood, it was the Four Seasons. Like whenever we were in the car, we had it basically on repeat. I had that, very old school recording where like it was like Perlman, Zuckerman, Shlomo Mintz, and Itzhak Stern playing one season each, which is, I would say, very different than the way I play them these days. But but it's a different
and
time,
and
different
each of
era.
them quite different.
I know, right? Yeah, on top of that. So, but anyway, it was, yeah. So very much the music of my childhood, and yeah, I've always been obsessed with it. And I feel two things. On one hand, and that's kind of going back to the curation of the program. Um, it's two things about it. First of all, there are these, that piece has influenced so many composers in obvious and non-obvious ways. Um, and but also I wanted to include a couple of pieces that come before that influence Vivaldi. And so we've done that with a couple of Italian Baroque.
It's
Uh,
actually really funny because we just did the Haydn Cello Concerto in C
yeah, of course, great piece.
with Tommy Mesa,
Mhm.
and there was a section in the piece that I hadn't really noticed before,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden we're sort of going through in the rehearsal. We're like, wait a minute, that's four seasons.
Oh,
Like that's
interesting.
Vivaldi. It's like,
Um,
and it's
the
not
last
a
one,
direct
maybe?
quote.
Or.
Yeah,
in
it's
the
not a
last one.
direct quote, but
Yeah.
there's a kind of an atmosphere of it that suddenly kind of like veers into. And I sat
Interesting.
there, I thought, "Ooh, how interesting!" It's sort of like, hmm.
I mean, he was the original virtuoso and the original, I mean, like that's and so yeah, I think that's part of it. And but also the part that I wanted to really showcase as which is different than maybe playing that we've done before and I've done it in other places, like two sets of four seasons, whether
Mhm.
it's the Piazzolla or the Richter or the Glass. There's there's nothing like the original. Like the Vivaldi original is incredible. And even if you think you've heard it before, I think um, there's a lot of, I would say, kind of maybe superficial approaches to the piece because you can just read the poems and try to sound like the wind and try to sound like the birds and whatever, and it's great. But I feel like that's just like the first layer, and
Mhm.
I recorded it a couple of years ago, and I've very much studied it and went a little crazy with it. At one point, before my recording project, I went into a little cabin in the mountains for a few days in the Sierras in California, and just like cooked Italian food and read like printed out the manuscript and like I read
Read the
all the
sonnets.
material and all the
Read the sonnets.
letters,
Yeah.
and like that's all I did. I had like no Wi-Fi, like nothing. So so anyway, so that's I would say how far I've gone with the piece. So I thought that for this program, it would be so nice to kind of really put that as the centerpiece,
Mhm.
not because it really kind of stands on its own as this just incredible piece of music, but also show all these influences and pick moments, movements from the other three major four seasons that have been written, in the past 80 years, inspired directly by it. And yeah, to kind of to put that at the center and then have these connections that are very direct, intertwined, but not take over how incredible the original is. So
So your idea is because I mean sometimes I've literally seen programs where it's like we'll do the Piazzolla Four Seasons in toto, and
yeah,
then okay after intermission we'll do the Vivaldi
of
in
course,
toto, and you just kind
yeah,
of like sort of experience them juxtaposed on either
yeah,
half of a concert or something like that. But
yeah.
your idea is to kind of interweave.
That's right. So, and I have a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I think these connections like across time are
Mm-hmm.
one of the most interesting parts about classical music. It's one of the most interesting things to be able to listen literally back to back, or in this case, even in between, to pieces that were written 300 years apart that are so related and, so, in this case, directly connected. And I think that's very unique to the genre that we play. That you can't do that in any other in any other one in music. So I think it's to have that is very important. I also think that it's worth exploring. I think for the audience to always go back to the original and to really showcase some of these. I mean, really, some of the movements I selected, for example, in the Richter, let's take that. I think I really try to choose the ones that also really speak about his language. Because if you listen to the whole four seasons, the Richter four seasons we composed, there are a lot of them that are very, very, very close to Vivaldi, or they have small changes. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say playing them in the same concert doesn't make much sense, in my opinion, like playing them back to back. But there's some movements, like the opening of Spring, for example, Spring 1, as it's called, that is brilliant. And it's so beautiful, and it's so him. It's so of his minimalist, and you take, the way whenever I rehearse it, for example, is you take it's instead of having three birds like they have in, like the opening solo of
Mm-hmm.
the Vivaldi Spring, where the three solo like the two principals and the soloists kind of talk to each other as birds. He takes the whole orchestra doing completely different parts, and each bird is super unique, but we all play the exact same birds. It's like six of them, and so it really sounds like this forest that you're in the in the middle of it, and I think it's my favorite movement of the whole piece, and it's just so him. So, I think it's so worth showcasing and bringing that kind of genius of his way, his language, uh, and showing it next to the original. So,
Did you ever? I mean, I'm just curious from an inspiration standpoint. Have you heard or know of other performances that take this approach, or is this something that just struck you as a as an interesting way to look at it?
the second, I've never, I think people have, as I said, we did a lot of eight seasons,
Right.
even there's a colleague that did recently, I think all 16 in concert or maybe in two shows or something like that, kind of like a marathon.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I think I mean, I think it maybe, maybe I would say maybe a bit of a risk or, a more innovative, different approach to just take the, certain movements of it. Um, and I do think also if I love playing Baroque music in a more kind of Baroque and period way with all my
Hmm.
ornaments and things like that. And I think you really need that to keep that contrast. I think if you were going to play it in a more modern, more like straightforward,
Right.
more kind of standard style, then I think maybe the concert would blur over a little bit more because the contrast and the back and forth would just not quite be there, I think. So.
So, from a curation standpoint, this is something that we think maybe is completely unique and new.
Yeah, I haven't because of course we all draw inspiration from other programs and other people and other people's ideas, but this one I actually was kind of obviously I remember having lunch with our executive director and just like kind of exploring the idea and then sitting with you talking about it and then sending the program. So yeah, it was very much I say very genuine and OG and original.
It's well, it's so funny because I always, when people talk about that kind of concept of like, well, is it, you know, was is that idea from so and so, or is this idea from so and so? Is I remember a, an an interview with Martha Graham, the great choreographer, and she was asked about her influences and what kinds of other choreographers influenced her work.
Yeah.
And she was very straightforward and very plain spoken.
Yep.
And she said, "Listen, we all steal. The question is, who do you steal from, and how do
Um,
you use it?"
that's a good one. Yep, I like that.
Which I love because it's like we I think it harkens back to an older idea that because in the certainly at some point in the 19th and certainly in the 20th century, the idea of new, unique, never been done before, all of this kind of stuff. Okay, that and literally OG, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
yeah,
I'm the first,
yeah.
and I'm the only one, and I'm the original. But it takes away from an idea that would have been so foreign to these composers because they all used each other's material
Of course.
and reworked it. And the whole point is exactly as Martha Graham said, the whole point was not the material. It was like, is the material good and is the material worth having an exploration of?
Yeah.
And if it is, well, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to make something more interesting out of it? What are you going to do? And so composers like Bach and Vivaldi, and I mean, we have all these transcriptions of Bach, of Vivaldi works, and
Mhm.
other. There's a in Handel, Israel and Egypt. There are fugues and all kinds of things that he took from other composers and reworked a fugue subject into his own kind of unique
Yeah.
way of going about it. So in in the grand scheme of things, I think it's important to understand that this idea of, you know, using existing material
Sure. Yeah.
is and it being forbidden to use existing material. You have to come up with new and
Uh-huh.
original material.
Yeah.
That this idea of using existing material was just part of the language of the lingua franca of the time. They all did it.
Yeah. No, of
You
course.
know,
Yeah. I mean, I just played a month ago or so. I played these transcriptions and kind of elaborations that Mozart wrote of Bach fugues for string quartet.
yeah.
They're actually quite complicated and really fun. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we lose sight of the fact that for years and years and years and years and years that these materials, the melodic ideas, the motives, whatever you want to call it, were kind of floating around, and composers, used them, took them, and said, "Well, that's an interesting. I like that. I'm going to do something with that." And then it became not about the original material; it became about
Yep,
what they did with it,
of course.
and that's really important. So I love the idea of of Richter in this in spring
Hmm.
taking pieces of the idea,
Yeah, literally. Yeah,
and then it's like, well, then what do you do with it?
yeah, of course.
What are you
Yeah.
doing with it that makes it your own, and then gives it a new perspective to look at it from a different direction?
And for on that point with Richter, I feel like it's like there's the movements I chose for this program, I feel like they're the closest to his language, and in my opinion, the most like the most interesting ones to listen to. They are, yeah, I feel like he really got it right in these, in the movements that I wanted to include. So
So what's exciting you about this program in the sense? I mean, we've talked about the curation of it and
yeah,
everything, and obviously that's exciting. And the idea of kind of like bringing it to life, this
yeah.
idea from, sitting in the mountains off grid.
Well, I'm gonna sound like a crazy person over here, which
No, 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 no. I mean, sitting in the
I
mountains
love it.
off grid is a great way to be.
I know, right? So no, I think one of the things I'm very excited about, and again, this is the first time I'm putting this sort of kind of like I would say s- it's like the largest scope of like making the whole program about this and this way. In It's to actually really explore with the musicians during the rehearsal process and all that a bit of the kind of the arc of the whole. Like we'll have a theoretical arc that you think about when you like go through the program. You think about
Right.
it. You kind of give it. I know all those pieces very well, so I'm hoping it will be there anyway. But like it's very when you really you almost kind of getting in your bones. There's like something about playing the music, playing it next to each other, and understanding like as many details as like what are the pauses, where the pauses going to be at, what kind of things do I want to say to the audience, where do I not want to say anything, a bit of the kind of bringing the show together, the concert experience like we were talking a little bit, and yeah, making it this arc that it's organic, that makes sense, that gets people hopefully coming out of of the hall being like, wow, that was like a journey, like really a path that we kind of take together with the audience, and that's I think that will really come together during my time with the orchestra,
Yeah.
which is
Well, and
I
it's
feel like
also
yeah,
because we also talked about the idea of do you do you and if we're again talking concert experience, because
sure,
not every program fits this particular kind of
hmm,
idea, but many programs do, in particular if they're carefully curated programs. We talked about the idea of like, well, do we interrupt the arc?
of course. Oh, yeah,
Or
yeah, that's right,
to
yeah,
just
I remember
to
you telling
fit
me.
it into the kind of the mold
Yep,
of an expected concert. You come in, you sit, you do, in the old days it was like overture, concerto, symphony.
that's right, that's
you
just
know
how it
it,
was.
it just plug, 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 plug,
Yep,
etc. Overture, concerto, symphony.
yep,
Unless you had one of these pieces that just was such a just overtook the entire program, Bruckner or Mahler or something like that.
yep.
But we did have a long conversation about this, because I'm also a firm believer in the idea that not every concert needs to be in what we might consider the standard format.
Of course.
And particularly if you're making a really compelling argument. Now, obviously, this isn't a 2 hour long program. Um, so it's not that it's not it's a digestible period of time. But I think in the sense of creating that sense of arc from beginning to end for an audience, and coming away from it with an hour's music,
Yeah.
basically.
Okay.
Um, that ultimately becomes a kind of a feast
Hmm.
where it's almost, hopefully it's not too little,
Yeah.
but the feeling I'm suspecting is everyone is going to feel, wow, I am fully satiated And I feel completely satisfied by this, and then you can really lead them
Hmm.
through your thought process on the program.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's important. It's like, and you just have to find the right balance between, you know, talking about the narrative or the connections and letting the music speak for itself. And I think it's going to be very interesting to find the right places to have those moments, of like connection with communication with the audience or not. And even things like bows, things like, kind of like, it's just like, how do you divide it up, but also make those parts work together well? And I think that's going to be really fun to do with the musicians and how that energy in the rehearsal, dress rehearsal, things like that feels
Mhm.
on stage and in the rehearsals, I mean, I guess, yeah, on stage. I think that's important. And then, of course, you always feel, the third element is always the audience, right? So that's where, yeah, what I think a bit of the in the moment side of things comes in. I led a Baroque program at La Jolla Summerfest a couple of years ago, and we had so it was like, it's like back double, and I think I'm sure there was some Vivaldi. I think I played Il Grosso Mogul, this like crazy Vivaldi concerto, and some other things. And I was leading, basically I was playing a couple of the concertos, but also leading the band in the rest of the pieces. And two awesome violinists we're supposed to play back double, and nobody's coming. Third piece in the program, and nobody's showing up. And then I'm like, all right, well, I have to really, like, we're waiting, and I'm like, oh, we'll tune. We don't need to tune. It's like 10 minutes in, but like, we'll retune. Still nothing, and people are starting to get a little tense. So then I started talking about, I made a joke, of course, and then I started talking about a bit of the program that I had, that, like I had kind of co-curated, and all that. And then that turned into like having a great reaction from the audience. And finally, there was actually a big kind of state, they weren't notified and whatever. Like they were just downstairs warming up, and so there was a bit of a logistics issue. But anyway, but because the audience was so receptive to this moment, we actually turned the rest of the program into much more kind of communicative and like explaining things. And we ended with, and this is the reason why I wanted to end, that you wanted to play the Bieber in the program, the Battaglia, because then, as well, people who will listen to this maybe will know a little bit more. But it was written in 1673, I believe, and it includes so many crazy things that sound very modern, just ideas that sound so modern, like playing multiple. I think there's like a one of the movements is like 8 folk melodies playing at once. It's just like this cacophony, and he actually marks in one of the places, have the bass put a piece of paper between the strings and then slap, so it sounds like a drum. While I'm playing this cadenza, the solo, the solo violin plays this cadenza. Anyway, and so all I said, like, it was just like we had talked more than we thought. So it was the last piece, and I'm like, I don't want to explain this too much. So I was like, instead of having, kind of what I had in mind, I was gonna say, I was like, hey, all I have to remind you guys are, like, I was like, all you need to know, this piece was somehow written in 1673. Just keep that in mind over the next like 12 minutes or so. And that was it. And it was like the perfect, like, again, it was not what I planned, but actually it felt really right. And people came out like, they loved it. So yeah.
Well, I think people are sometimes astonished at the, shall we say, modernist
Mhm.
bent of works of the medieval and Baroque period.
Of course.
I
The
mean,
Gesualdo
and the
Score.
Renaissance and everything. I mean, things, look, Gesualdo. I mean,
Of course. I mean,
the
come on.
harmonic thorniness of what's going
I
on and all of
know.
that. I mean, it really truly is. There's nothing new under the sun. It's like, okay, well, maybe it took the 20th century to kind of
That's
get
right.
these things back a little bit more into
Black
the.
Angels is not that far from Bieber. You
It's
know what I mean?
it's not.
So,
It's really really not. And it's again, it's kind of, everything old is new, everything new is old. It's
I love that. I do think the 20th century music or 21st, kind of like the last 120 years, really, because there's such a love for that medieval, but kind of rediscovery of all this music
mhm.
over the past 100 years. So many of these composers were, obviously extremely, well, like studied and nerdy and like love to dig deep, just like we do.
Yeah.
Then into the past, then you see this connection. You can really explore so many things over, from 15th century even before all the way to music that's commissioned today. So
Yeah, yeah, no, it's probably one of the most exciting things about having experienced and being alive at this point and having the benefit of the last
oh yeah,
120 years of people kind of scratching at old
that's
things
right.
and going, there's something interesting in
I know.
here, you know?
I feel like the more new music experience you are, the more you do that. I have a good friend you probably know, Jay Campbell, the cellist.
Yeah.
And like I can't tell you, we've played together, so many times. We were in a kind of school quartet together back at Juilliard days, and I literally can't tell you how many times I've gone to his like hotel room to pick him up or whatever in some festival or somewhere we're playing together, and he'll be in the car, put on his Spotify, and be like, dude, what is this? He's like, oh, there's this indie band from, Turkmenistan that I've been listening to. Or like, be like some traditional Mongolian music from 200 years ago. And I'm like, wow, okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a really interesting recording of an orchestra from I think it's in Turkey. I could be
Okay.
wrong. I
That,
I think it's in Turkey.
all right.
Um, that recorded Scheherazade,
Mm-hmm.
Rimsky,
Yeah, of course.
but between movements recorded indigenous folk
Love
stuff
that.
that
Yep.
puts the flavor of the kind of the attempt of Rimsky to
Yeah.
kind of make things in the day they would have called it Orientalisms,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
at that time period
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what they would have referred to it as. But the idea of like the flavor, that folk flavor of it that he sometimes gets, and intersperse that in between the movements with indigenous folk music, which is
Hey.
sort of like,
Yeah.
wow, that's an interesting
I know, right?
collection
Exactly.
between and people. I love it when people do that
No,
and sort of
exactly.
make these
It's
interesting little connections.
It
There's
goes
a,
all the way
there's
to like Bartok, you know what I mean? For
yeah,
example, I mean,
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
super clear. Like, I remember one of a really great concert I went to a few years ago, and it was the New England Conservatory, and Larry Lesser, the cellist, was playing the first Rhapsody arrangement for, the cello, and then he showed us prior to him performing, not even in a really academic way. It was just like they played the recordings that actually Bartok had, like the field recordings, that
Yeah,
obviously he uses the same melodies
yeah,
in that one piece. And
yeah.
then you're like, again, as a younger now, I feel like I know about those recordings. I've listened to them, I've like dug deeper into Bartok. But back, 10, 12 years ago, and I was still, like a grad student, I was like, whoa, what is this? So, yeah.
Well, and that's, I mean, those influences. I mean, you go back and I mean, Stravinsky famously said, "There's no folk music in Rite of Spring," which is a pile of bunk. I mean, it's
Yeah.
all over the place. You
Well,
know,
he liked to sound, he liked to be
you know,
fancy, so.
but you go back into composers all throughout using folk material, the found material that is just like it's in their ears,
Yeah,
and it's really really fascinating sometimes to sort of kind of see the sources of some of the material,
of
like where
course.
it comes
Yes.
from.
Yeah.
Haydn discovering some Hungarian folk tune that he
Mhm.
liked and working
That's
it
right.
into a piece.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
Haydn.
it's so much fun. So much
Yeah.
fun. So just sort of like to, we're getting towards the end of our discussion,
All right.
and just sort of maybe, I don't know if you have any, thoughts about like what kinds of program curations are you particularly interested in working with us, in the coming,
Yeah.
few seasons here and everything. I mean, obviously I don't mean to put you on the spot and sort of say
I
like,
know,
okay,
but
tell
it's
me what
fine.
you're doing.
I
Um,
know,
you know,
of course.
but I mean, we've talked a little bit about the kinds of things that interest you. I mean, are you percolating some thoughts
Oh
about
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. This is like a bit like peeking behind the curtain of like our coffee conversations in New York.
a little bit?
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think. obviously there's many ways we can go about this, and one of the things that I think for future, see, whenever, in the next couple of years, would love to do, is because Kimmel is such a beautiful hall, and we have the equipment and we have the kind of um, the setup for it, I would say.
Hmm.
I would love to. I've been really exploring this also in a chamber program that I'm curating somewhere else, and of doing some sort of music connected to art. There's this amazing artist, kind of like a projection artist, if you want to call her that way, like kind of that uses, kind of sets up based on the geometry of like the space, or it's not just like putting it on a screen, but
Right,
like
right.
using the wood behind a stage and the sides and things like that. Kind of curates basically paintings, like
Mhm.
paintings from from whatever era, of course, depending, projected onto it, and then so I would love to find a way to be able to bring that again to the concert experience of like bringing art, visual art mixed with music in a interesting way. One of the ideas that I had about this, for example, is obviously I'm from Spain originally, and there, if you look at kind of great Spanish painters and artists over the past in history, and you look at kind of like really important paintings, just kind of like the Four Seasons would be in classical music.
Hmm.
There are two that really stand out that are kind of related to each other, which is Goya's The Execution of in May 2nd of 1808,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and with
Yes.
the guy with the white shirt and
Yep,
with
yep.
the
That famous paint.
Spanish-French
Yep.
War, and of course the Guernica, the Picasso's Guernica, and they're 131 years apart,
Hmm.
and they're two, I would say, most impactful wars that Spain has suffered in their territory in that period, in the last 200 and some odd years,
Hmm.
since the French Revolution anyway, you know what I mean, like
Right.
let's put it that way. And there's so much music that can be related to those two paintings, and this of course the theme of war, but also Picasso spent most of his life in Paris, during, as we know, during all the modernists and all the great composers, great musicians of the time, of the Ravels, the Debussys, the many more. And then on the other hand, Goya, for example, uh, was the court painter for Charles IV, and his there's a really famous painting with the family of Charles IV. You might have seen it.
Hmm.
It's like huge. It's in the Prado Museum. It's like massive. But then, guess which composer he painted as well in a very similar painting of the brother of the king's family is Luigi Boccherini, because he lived in Madrid most of his life. And we have a Scarlatti, of course, that spent a lot of time in Spain during that time.
Yep.
So there's a lot of like more obscure Baroque and classical and kind of Galan period music of that time written by Spanish composers. So there's many ways to. So anyway, so that was it doesn't have to be that theme specifically, but
Yeah.
some sort of connection with art and having this kind of uh, yeah, bring
Well,
that experience.
I'm glad to hear you say that because we have thoughts along those lines.
Amazing. So,
So I
that's
think I teased out an idea, but it's not an idea that we have not. Let's say the double negative. It's not an idea that we have not been discussing.
I love that.
So we have some thoughts in coming seasons about how to accomplish some of these things because I do believe that this whole, and again it sort of turns it back to the to the things that we've been talking about, this whole idea of the concert experience and how you how you curate that experience for the audience, not just musically, but the whole package of the concert experience, is something that's incredibly important. Something I'm interested in, clearly something you're interested in. And I think our audiences hopefully will begin to see over the course of the next season or so some of the fruits of those ideas because it's important. It's again, if someone is going to make the effort to leave, they can stream the Berlin Philharmonic from their living room.
Of course.
So why come and choose to drive to
Yep,
a concert or take a subway or take a
that's
bus
right.
or something? And we have to think carefully about how to make that an absolutely worthwhile thing to do. You know,
I completely
make
agree.
make a choice that works well, and you feel like, wow, I could not have gotten that sitting
Yep.
on my couch.
For sure. I mean, that's I think that's a huge part of it, and I think it can be done at such a, I like to think so that we can do it in a very tasteful, very interesting, very thought-provoking, and kind of
Yep,
stimulating way,
yep, yep.
and in a way that, yeah, it's not about, I don't know, like just making the music smaller, but actually bringing it to the center of the experience and to really,
Absolutely. Music has to be at the center
that's
always.
right. So it's
That's
like to
that's the
have
most
that kind of
important thing.
guiding light in,
Yep, yep,
to kind of all kind of makes, yeah, the experience of listening to music live and make it as rich and interesting and as stimulating as possible. So
yep. Nope. Totally on that
it's
page.
gonna be great. I
So
can't wait.
for our audiences, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation. I've certainly enjoyed having a
I'll have a
conversation
great time.
again with Francesco. Um, the concert is on March 28th and the 30th. It is a curated Four Seasons. You get your Vivaldi on, you get your Richter on, you get your Piazzolla, you get a whole bunch of stuff.
So,
But it's going to be really an exciting program, and I hope everyone will come out and join us for this program because, as Francisco said, it's unique, it's new, and it's a take you probably have not heard on this wonderful music. So thank you for bringing it to us.
no, of course, and it was been such a pleasure. Again, I feel like we're just having our normal conversations, but in a more public setting, and so it's fun to
That's true.
just have a chat, and
Yep,
hopefully people enjoy hearing us talking about these things, nerd
absolutely.
out a little bit.
Yeah, nerd out a little bit. I'm
That's right.
I'm fully into nerding out a little bit. Music nerding
That's
is really good.
that's oh yeah, we love it.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you.
Francisco. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, David.
Take care.
Bye.